Bob Levey is a prize-winning journalist who has covered the Washington scene since the Johnson administration. For 23 years, he wrote a daily column, Bob Levey's Washington, for the Washington Post. The column looked at all aspects of life in the nation's capital and won major awards from the Society of Professional Journalists and the Washington Journalism Review. Currently, he writes a monthly column for the Senior Beacon newspapers. 7 times, Bob Levey was named one of the most popular columnists in Washington by Washington Magazine for his Post column. Early in his 36th career at the Post, Bob Levey covered presidential politics, Congress, local news, and sports. In 1999, Bob Levey was named a Washingtonian of the Year by Washingtonian Magazine in recognition of his community service through his column and as a hands-on volunteer. Bob Levey has also had an extensive career in electronic media. Over the course of more than 20 years, he worked for 9 radio stations, 4 TV stations, and 1 popular internet site as a commentator and talk show host. Levey was voted the 1994 Radio Talk Show Host of the Year in the Washington market. He is currently serving as Virginia Stabney Distinguished Professor of Journalism at Virginia Commonwealth University. And if that wasn't enough for a resume, he is a semi-professional folk singer. Please join me in warmly welcoming Mr. Bob Levey.
Thank you so much. No, I will not sing for you this morning. My semi-professional folk singing career is now confined to the shower, and the answer to your next question is no. Just a couple of notes about that introduction. I have indeed been a working journalist in Washington, D.C. since the Johnson administration, but that would be the Lyndon Johnson administration. I know I'm old, but Andrew was before my time. I am so delighted to be with you here today at Taft, and I am here today because of the bad judgment of your own Ozzie Parenti. Ozzie Parenti was friends with my son in college. They played soccer together in college. That was bad judgment number 1 by Ozzie. Bad judgment number 2 was when Ozzie attended my son's wedding this summer. Bad judgment number 3 was when he said to me there, you know, you might really be good as a speaker at Taft. So, Ozzie, thank you, and may your bad judgment continue. And by the way, may the success of Taft soccer continue. I heard all about, yeah. One of the bad things about serving a life sentence in Washington, D.C. is that I don't get to see soccer games out of Washington, D.C. anymore. But you know what? My bad judgment may prevail, and I just might have to do it. I'll go find the schedule. Good morning, everybody, and I am delighted to appear before you here in March of 2017 because it's as if this date was foreordained. The issues in journalism right now, the future of the media right now, the connection between the media and the political process right now, we have never been at a moment like this. And I want to begin, as all good history students do, by telling you that you can never understand the future of the media until you understand the past. And by that I mean that the speed with which change has overtaken the media, the speed with which certain norms have been discarded, the speed with which media themselves have gone from being among the most successful businesses in America to among the most threatened, it's truly mind-boggling. Come back with me exactly 25 years. When I was writing my column at the Washington Post and the phone rang one day, and it was the boss, Donald Graham, the son of the legendary Katharine Graham. And Don said, would you come upstairs, please? There's a meeting I want you to attend. And I went upstairs. The year was 1992, not 1492. This is in our lifetimes, many of us. And I went upstairs, and in that room were 9 people dressed like this, with hair like this. And there were 2 young men sitting there without suits, with their shirt tails hanging out, wearing Converse All-Stars, tattoos, if I recall, maybe some jewelry hanging from various parts of their ears. And these two young men were there to educate the suits about something new called the internet. It had not taken hold yet. Yeah, it had been invented a couple of years earlier, but it hadn't taken hold. And these young men told this assemblage of suits that the potential for the internet to upend the media forever and ever was huge. And there we sat, ink all over ourselves, putting out a newspaper pretty much the way we'd put it out for hundreds of years. The press, the printed press, the printing press was about 400 years old then, and we were still making newspapers with it the way we had 400 years ago. I barely used a computer even 25 years ago. I used something called a typewriter. And there we sat in this meeting listening to these two young men tell us that the future was electronic, that it was on the internet. And finally, one of the suits piped up and said, okay, I see this, but won't this just be a larger platform for what we do already? And the young men said, oh no, the internet is going to reshape everything, because it will not just be the internet, it will be how the internet is delivered and received. And we nodded, and then finally one of the suits said, yeah, but let's talk about money. We sell our journalism, and so does every other journalist in the world. What do we do about this? How do we monetize the Washington Post on the internet? And memorably, this young man sat up straight and said, well, you know, information on the web, it wants to be free. I can't imitate it, sorry, but that's what he said. And all the suits nodded, and from that moment forward began one of the most critical business decisions of my life and your life and everybody's life, a decision that continues to haunt everybody in journalism to this day. The idea was that if you simply give them the journalism that you'd previously charged for, that it would all kind of work out in the end. That if you just put people in the room, that sooner or later advertising would follow, subscriptions would follow, and the business would thrive ever more. It has not worked out that way. 5,500 daily newspapers were published in the United States of America 40 years ago. Today that number is 1,700. The number of people employed in daily journalism has fallen by more than 40% in the last 15 years. The web itself has broadened journalism into precincts that were unimaginable. But it has also brought about trials for journalism that it never had before. Mostly having to do with accuracy and mostly having to do with the idea that anybody with a cell phone and a camera and a keyboard can be a journalist. We're struggling in the media. We're struggling to shape a future of the media where accuracy is prized. And yet more and more speed is prized and candy is prized. This will be the tension of your lives going forward. It's the tension of your lives right now. Let's look at a couple of examples of how deliberate journalism is really worth the time that it takes to create it and your time in consuming it. All of you remember the story of a few years ago that happened not far from here in Newtown, Connecticut, when a young man decided to shoot up an elementary school and killed a large number of very small children. If that incident had happened 30 years earlier, there would have been no Reddit, there would have been no Facebook, there would have been no Instagramming of photos, there would have been nothing like what happened that day in Newtown. But let's review the bidding. Here is what happened that day in Newtown on Reddit and on social media. The first reports about that incident were wrong in every respect. And if you go back and look at this, they had not the correct shooter, but the shooter's brother being responsible for the shooting. They reported breathlessly that this shooter had attended that school in Newtown, and he had not. They reported erroneously that he had bought the gun himself. He had not. His mother had bought it for him. The numbers of deaths were wrong. The exact location of the school early on was wrong. It was wrong, 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 a cavalcade of wrong. And what we have, though, is an unapologetic world of the media now, fueled by the internet, enabled by the internet, that simply goes on to the next day's news cycle. There really is no more correcting the record. The record just screams ahead. So where does this leave us now, and where does this point us as we go into the future? Well, where it leaves us now is a sharper than ever split between media that do take the time to report carefully and accurately and are edited by other people, and media that are not. How's this for a statistic? I just heard this the other day, and I offer it to you because I think it is a real weather vane of where we are going. Today, 1 out of every 6 people alive will be on Facebook. That is stupendously large numbers of people. That is, I can't even imagine how many people that is. Maybe the math people can tell me that. Can you? It's a lot. Facebook does not do journalism. Facebook does links. Facebook does comments. Facebook relays other people's journalism. So where does that leave the journalists themselves? It leaves them providing journalism in the way that they always did to an audience that may not want it exactly in that way. As I said before, we seem to like candy a great deal, and we seem to be living in an era where entertainment and news are forever joined. We simply can't seem to have one without the other. Now, I'm not naive. I know that my beloved Washington Post runs comic strips and crossword puzzles. So does the New York Times, although it does not run comic strips. The Times is too good for that kind of thing. What we have is a strange moment here where the old true brands of journalism are doing what they always did, although on different platforms, and more news takes on the coloration and the appearance of everything else that's on the web. It's so interesting to trace the way things really work in this day and age. If you go back to November 8th, 2016, and you ask, where did most people follow the election returns that night? The answer throughout most of my life would have been major television networks, the over-the-air networks like ABC, CBS, and NBC, or the reputable newspapers. The answer on November 8th, 2016 was Facebook, hugely more than anything else, and then websites that interestingly were the big brands: CNN, MSNBC, CBS News, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post. Which would argue to me, and I hope does argue to you, that the future of the media may pay more attention to the past than you actually do in your everyday lives. It's kind of a rush back to quality when the chips are down, when you know there's a big story out there, and you know that the established people will give you the best of that big story. But day by day, day after day, the numbers are daunting because more and more people are deserting those big media and going to, well, where are they going? They are going to the Facebook posts of their friends. They are going to links that may or may not enhance the story or enhance your education. They are going to places where entertainment is king and where speed is king. On September 11th, 2001, there was a great disaster in our country. I was in the newsroom of the Washington Post that day. I will never forget it. All of you should have the experience that all of us in big newspapers have on a day like that, when all of a sudden on a sleepy morning at 9 a.m., everybody gears up into fifth gear in about 1 second. I worked for the next 36 hours without sleep. So did we all. It was the biggest story of that year. And if you look back at where people went for their news on 2001, Facebook didn't even figure because Facebook barely existed then. Instagram did not exist. The internet was not the port of call for everybody. The Washington Post produced an extra that night. This is like something out of a bad movie that you guys can watch on YouTube some night. Newsboy on the corner with one of those old newsboys hats holding up a piece of paper that says, "Extra, extra, read all about it." It won't happen in your lifetime. The last time it will happen in my lifetime was that day, September 11th, 2001. Go back and look at what happened that day. The Washington Post had huge readership. The New York Times had huge readership. Mid-sized dailies around the country did. Television news had tremendous spikes of interest because in 2001, only 15% of the country had cable television. That number is now creeping up to 70% of the households in America. So we have changed over from needing to know, wanting to know, to a strange product in media land that is now called infotainment, that now says, believe it or not, and I'm trying to believe this, that there are more Americans out there who consider Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert and Sean Hannity and Rachel Maddow primary sources of information, when in fact they are all commentators or comedians. Where does this leave us? Well, it leaves us in a very odd place, and nobody's in an odder place than television. When I was young, there was one god in American journalism, and his name was Walter Cronkite. A lot of you probably never heard of Walter Cronkite, but he was the anchor of the CBS Evening News for more than 20 years. He had a great, simple delivery. He was believable. He had more viewers than anybody in the world. Every night he had 60 million viewers on CBS News. You know how many people watched CBS News last night? Maybe a little more than 10 million. The fall away has been huge. And what does this mean for all of us? It means that we no longer have that totem, that one source that we absolutely believe on television. And don't even get me started, please, on local news, which is fraying even worse than ever. I think one of the great moments of my career, and I've worked for a lot of television stations, was at a Christmas party once at the ABC affiliate in Washington, D.C., where everybody came dressed in yellow crime scene tape, because that's all you can see on local television anymore, murder upon murder upon murder. There's no depth, there's no exploration. And the ratings are proving where local television is going. It's going down, down, down. Interestingly, the one time period in American local television that is growing is 4 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, I know, you're asleep and so am I, but more and more people are not. And if you ever happen to get up and turn on your television at 4 o'clock in the morning, they will be there. The anchor man, the anchor woman, the sports guy, the weather guy, all of those characters. But the 11 o'clock news is pretty dead in most cities. The 6 o'clock is quickly following. So where is our national conversation? Where are we going in the future of the media? Interestingly, I think where we are going is toward a return to quality, both in terms of the quality that's served up, it's very high quality, and in terms of your appetite for it. I really believe that people your age are going to get sick and tired of reading 100 million blogs about every single thing that happens, and they're going to want an authoritative voice, and that voice is there. However, more and more, the print product of today and of yesterday will go away. Prediction for you, the print New York Times will be gone within 10 years. Prediction number 2, the print Washington Post will be gone sooner. Prediction number 3, there will not be local news on television beyond 10 years from now. It simply won't pay. But here's prediction number 4, which actually fills me with optimism, because I think finally we may be moving toward the point where the internet gives us more potential as news organizations and not less. If you look at the potential of Facebook, and if you look at what Facebook could do if it curated news more carefully rather than just passing along links, and if it did its own news reporting and editing, you are looking at the dominant future of news in our world. As for the Washington Post, everybody in Washington has woken up with the Post for years and years and years. The Post was bought about 2.5 years ago by one of the most rich, influential people in the world, Jeffrey Bezos, who owns Amazon. And it's quite clear that what is coming for the Washington Post is for him to take the Washington Post and fold it into Amazon Prime, where in addition to buying your dog food and your cereal, you can buy the Washington Post, and it might be the only way to do it. What will happen to your own habits? That's what's so interesting, because you know that you could live your life like this, and more of you do. Is the delivery of news in the future going to be like this, or will there still be a way for and an appetite for you to sit down as your grandparents did and say, you know, it's Sunday morning, and I think I want to sit here with my 3rd cup of coffee and the newspaper? It's quaint, I know, but there are still a lot of people who want that, a lot of people who do that. And all of you in this room have got to understand that you have the potential to determine this outcome. You have the potential to decide which media survive and which do not. You know, so often in my career, I have heard this idea that the media are doing things to you, that you are some vast pool of unsuspecting lemmings who have no say in the matter, and that journalism just gets aimed downward at you from 30,000 feet, and you go like this, like something out of a bad horror movie. That isn't the way it works. Journalism is a transaction. Journalism depends on what you choose. And in the future of the media, you will have a voice such as you have never had before. Will you choose that 3rd cup of coffee and the New York Times, or will you settle for Reddit? Will you demand the kind of journalism that you're getting routinely from the best organizations, or will you not? It is up to you. Now, one comment before I finish about the current political scene. All of you who think that journalism has taken it on the chin and that somehow what you can see this morning and what you can see any day has been compromised by the political process, by the political mood, I can assure you that just the opposite is true. Excuse me, I need a little mother's milk here. This is coffee, good stuff. My journalism career depends on it. No, I've been married to the same wonderful woman for almost 40 years, and in 40 years I have lied to her about only one thing, and that is how much coffee I drink every day. She thinks the over-under is 2 cups a day. Say hello to number 3. I am looking forward to number 4 and number 5. Is my secret safe with you? I hope so, yeah. What we really are facing is whether your appetite out there is going to transcend politics. Whether you really believe that a free press and a vigorous press can serve you and help you. I, of course, believe that nothing is more critical to our country and nothing is more critical to you. But it has to be merged with a real understanding of what your viewing habits, your consuming habits are, and how much time and energy and attention you're willing to spend to get what's good out there. Way back when I was a little kid, my grandmother had the most wonderful habit of offering me something called castor oil. You know it? It lives on. You know, I could have broken my leg, I could have the sniffles, and my grandmother's remedy for everything was, here, honey, have a tablespoon of castor oil. It was the most foul-tasting stuff. If I never go near castor oil again, I will be proud and happy. But really, that is where we are in the world of media, ladies and gentlemen. You have got to open up your mouths and say, I am willing to read a very deep story about the Russian influence on American elections, even if it's not quick and dirty, even if it doesn't have any Kardashians in it, even if it doesn't have any slam dunks in it, even if it doesn't have any whoops moments at the Academy Awards in it, because it's important to you. Are you going to go just for the candy, or are you going to be like my grandmother and say castor oil? I think we're at a key crossroads here. The other crossroads that we're at, and I know I'm getting short on time here, the other crossroads that we're at are the nerve of the big media. When the President of the United States says that the big newspapers and all media are the enemy of the American people, I can assure you that that only stiffens the backbones of people in American newsrooms. They are going hard at every story, not out of vengeance, but because this is a story of real concern to every one of you. One of my great moments in my entire life was in 1972 when I was a young reporter at the Washington Post, and they said, we're going to give you two new reporters here, two new seatmates. And they sat me there, and to my left was a young man named Carl Bernstein, and to my right was a young reporter named Bob Woodward. And very soon they became the most famous reporters in the world for a story called Watergate. They lassoed this story and bulldogged it for 2.5 years, and they are going to be, and are right now, the most famous reporters who ever lived. I sat right between them for every minute of Watergate. It was the experience of a lifetime. No, I am not in the movie. Yes, I should be in the movie. There's a lot of gossip around Washington that they're going to do a remake of All the President's Men for the 50th anniversary. This will be my chance. Tom Cruise? Maybe Brad Pitt, I'm hoping. No, if I were in that movie, it would really, I'd have a one-line role, because every afternoon when Watergate was hot and hot and hotter, flotillas of editors would descend on our little pod there to look at what Bob and Carl had that day, and I was not covering Watergate. So here's my line from the remake of the movie. Would all of you please be quiet so I can get some work done here? I did it every day. What Watergate should tell us, and what Watergate would tell us if it happened today, is that deep, patient, careful journalism always wins the day. It's a little like going to school at Taft, everybody. You can't do it if you don't do it. You have to dig in hard and dig in all the way, and Bob and Carl did that. What they showed us was not just that journalism can identify a great story and run with it and make it work, but they showed us that the depth that is necessary to great journalism is possible. Bob and Carl wrote about 120 stories about Watergate over 2.5 years, and every one of them had more than one source. That is a stupendous achievement, because there are only 24 hours in a day, and there certainly were many reasons and many nights when they should have gone to press with only one source, but they didn't do it. They realized the stakes. They worked harder than ever. And in the current political climate, I want to assure you that there are reporters out there working harder than ever to get the truth. But important for you to understand, the truth is not about getting a president. The truth is not about getting a political party. The truth is the truth. So many times Woodward and Bernstein have been accused of getting Richard Nixon, who was a Republican president, and surely this was a big hit job done by communists, liberals, socialists, you name it. Well, that's very interesting when you consider who Bob Woodward was. Bob Woodward grew up on the North Shore of Chicago. Bob Woodward's father was a judge, a stalwart in the Republican Party. Bob Woodward grew up at country clubs. Bob Woodward socialized only with Republicans. Bob Woodward said famously that he never saw an African American until he was 16 years old. Bob Woodward is not your basic communist, liberal, socialist missile aimed at a Republican president. Carl Bernstein, on the other hand, kind of was. Carl's parents were members of the Communist Party. And for those of you who are not up on your history here, Carl was a red diaper baby. Anybody know what that is? Members of the Communist Party would have children and they would swaddle the poor dear newborn in a red diaper in hopes that somehow that would induce the little baby to be a member of the Communist Party someday. That really happened. And Carl was a red diaper baby. Carl was a socialist. Carl deeply believed in, certainly in Carl, but also in all kinds of liberal causes. So, do the two of them cancel each other out? I think they did very effectively because they parked their politics on the shelf and they went after the greatest story of the day. What's happening today? What is really happening today? The great journalists of today are going after a great story today. All of you should be paying very close attention to the story of Russia and the Trump administration. Because, and this is not a prediction, it's just a feeling that this is going to be huge in months to come. Now, when media pursue this story, does that mean that they are anti-Trump? Does that mean they are pro somebody else? Not at all. Journalism has a kind of purity about itself and a kind of process about itself that prevents that. You could not add political mix to the brew if you wanted, because there are creatures out there called editors who wouldn't let it happen. Here's the problem, though, that more and more, because of the internet, even greatly respected organs like the New York Times and the Washington Post are rubbing down the line between straight news and opinion. So many times in my life, people have come up to me and said, you know, I'm so disappointed in journalism because all I want is the facts. Just give me the facts. Let me figure it out from there. And we do give you the facts. The trouble is that we're in a market-driven world where we have to be as attractive as everybody who's on the internet and everybody who's on television. So it kind of creates an estuary between sorry English teachers here, the salt water of straight journalism and the fresh water of opinion. There's kind of a mix there in the middle. What do we do about this? I think that all of you in the future should insist on, and I think you will get, two major changes in the world of journalism. Number one, you're going to see an end to endorsement of candidates. This has to happen, I think, because it's just confusing the issue. When the Washington Post endorsed Hillary Clinton for president, and then the next day said, we're going to go out and cover both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton objectively, everybody in the whole world said, really? You really are? Well, yes, they really are, and yes, they really did, but it's a tough sell, isn't it? Where does the line get drawn between an editorial endorsement and news coverage? It doesn't make sense to try to draw that line because nobody believes it. Out of the business of endorsements, please. Second thing we absolutely have to do, and you should insist on this, is run on the editorial pages of every American newspaper every day a box that says, what you're reading on these 2 pages is opinion. It is the opinion of the authors, it is the opinion of the editorial writers, it is the opinion of the publisher. It has nothing to do with the news that's in the front of the A section. Nothing. The two staffs do not meet. They barely know each other. They don't confer. They don't get together like football players in the huddle and call signals. They don't do any of those things. And I think that would go a long way toward restoring the credibility of big journalism, making people like you consume it through the castor oil analogy, and really stabilizing a business that's been tremendously destabilized in the last 15 years. I think there's a big future for the media. I think there will be more educated people than ever, more news than ever, a greater appetite for news than ever, and a greater understanding among groups like you that this is complicated stuff. And so therefore you have to invest your time and energy in it also. I think we're going to settle this. I know we're going to settle the issue of whether there will be good journalism. There is, and there will be. Thank you again for the chance to be with you this morning, and thanks. And